Colorado is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
I think the gentleman, my friend from South Carolina, covered a lot of ground, so I'm just trying to keep track. I'm glad to hear that he believes the bald eagle should be protected, and bears as well. Apparently he has very spirited views on which animals should be protected and which should not. I'm reading from a U.S. Fish and Wildlife report that was issued last year that says, and quote, with respect to these bats, that they eat enough pests to save more than $1 billion per year in crop damage and decline, as well as pesticides costs. So, I think the American people can rest assured that my friend from South Carolina isn't in charge of making the decisions as to what animals are endangered or not. That is a judgment reserved by virtue of the Endangered Species Act to the experts who look at these matters in an objective, independent way, free of any political interference, soliciting, of course, input through the rulemaking process from industry, from a wide range of stakeholders, and then rendering a judgment that they believe is in the best interest of the country and of protecting that species. So, look, I have to just step back again and underscore the point that the ranking member made earlier about the priorities of this committee and of the Congress under Republican control. And I have great respect for my chairman on the Natural Resources Committee, and it's a privilege to serve with him on that committee, and of course, my ranking member, the former chair. So I take it he'll construe my questions with that preface. But maybe you could kind of illuminate the committee, Mr. Chairman. When does government funding run
out? The government funding, we all know, goes through the September the 30th when the fiscal year takes place, and
correct.
I don't know what that has to do with the northern long-eared bat.
Well, I'm going to get to it.
Chicken, but
it does. It has a direct connection. So September 30th, right? Government shuts down if the Congress doesn't fund it. That's 67 days from now. Does that sound about right? Right?
Sounds right.
All right. We've got a couple of days left here in session this week before the congressional recess begins. Right?
Starts next week.
Starts next week. Starts this Friday. Right? Yep. Congressional recess this year, under the schedule Republicans released, is 45 days. So 45 days of those 67 days before government shuts down, we're not here in Washington. Do you know how many appropriation bills we've passed in the House under Republican control?
You talking about out of committee or off the House floor?
I'm talking about out of the House floor.
I believe there's a couple possibly scheduled for this
possibly.
week. Possibly. I'm with you. We should be passing appropriation bills.
I agree.
That's the reason we come to Congress, and I have full faith that eventually we will get the appropriation bills passed.
Well, I think heavy emphasis on possibly, as you said, because I don't, we're taking up two bills, one bill today, one bill tomorrow. We'll see if those get a vote on the floor.
We did get a provision where we cut the funding by 1% if those bills don't get passed. So we know that's lurking in the shadows as well.
Well, you asked a question, Mr. Chairman, and so I'll answer it about what connection does this have to the lower prairie chicken and what's the second animal that we're dealing with?
Northern long-eared bat.
Long-eared bat, yeah, okay. So 67 days until the government shuts down, no appropriation bills passed out of the House of Representatives under Republican control, a few days left in the House, in session, before we go on a 45-day recess, and we're here debating reversing rules issued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over the lower prairie chicken and the long-eared bat.
Lesser prairie chicken.
I'm just saying, Mr. Chairman, and that's the choice that Republicans make with respect to the priorities they want to pursue on the House floor. That's their prerogative. You have the majority, you have the gavels, but I can assure, I know you would know this, I can assure the American public that we would certainly have different priorities if we had the gavels, and we would not be careening towards a government shutdown, as unfortunately it seems, as the House is. Now, you didn't say this, but one of your colleagues here on the Rules Committee did. I found it fascinating. He made the argument and maybe he'll return to the committee, that he connected the two CRAs that we're taking up today. I think these were his words, that this sort of connection to inflation, that he hears a lot about inflation at Mr. Burgess's return. So I don't want to quote him out of context, but the notion that somehow these CRAs connect to House Republicans' efforts to lower inflation, I just think the American people are going to have a tough time understanding that argument. And here's why, right? Because we could consider bills to lower insulin costs, to eliminate junk fees, to lower health insurance costs, to enact a child tax credit, all of these policies, by the way, that congressional Democrats pursued for the better part of 2 years, that would make a real difference in terms of lowering costs or growing the middle class. If you and if my colleagues want to convey to the American public that their solution to inflation, which by the way is lowest, or rather the most significant decline point in the last 2 years was last week. But in any event, if the solution to inflation is reversing the protection on the long-eared bat, I'm not sure that's an argument that's going to work, but that's not my
maybe I can.
Of course, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe I can help explain that to you, and also why it takes more time when you're actually trying to be fiscally responsible and pass appropriation bills that are show that we're good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, rather than just passing a lot of spending like drunken sailors and passing huge mandatory spending bills. That's pretty easy. But when you get in and start looking at what's important and start prioritizing that becomes more difficult. And I think that's where my friends across the aisle miss the point on how these little things actually are big things, and they add up. And when you put more regulations and burdens on the people who are growing the food, who are producing the lumber to build the houses, who are doing the blue-collar jobs across this country, when you put more regulations on them and it causes them not to be able to do their job, they're already facing high labor rates. They're facing issues with people not coming back to work because my friends across the aisle passed so many programs that weren't COVID-related, that used COVID as a red herring to get these spending bills put in
data,
place.
Mr. Chairman, to point to?
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction
No,
Act,
I'm not
which
talking
was
about that. I'm
mislabeled.
talking about with respect to the listing that you mentioned.
Yeah,
Because
so-
I pulled the rulemaking, and I didn't see any empirical data.
Let me tell you how
that was-
this actually works. I'll tell you from my district.
Sure.
And this is, and I reject the notion that Republicans don't care about the northern long-eared bat or the lesser prairie chicken, and the quote science. I don't know who these scientists are.
Mr. Chairman, and I want to interrupt you, but literally one of your colleagues just said if it was up to him, he would eliminate the bat from the world. So I don't know that. I hear you and your point. But that just happened right now. So
But if you truly
you can clarify
care
me
about-
if you said that the bat would. You hope they were wiped out. Did I mishear that?
No. Thank you for yielding.
Of course.
Mr. Geese, I didn't say eliminated from the world. I said.
What was the? What did you?
I said the disease, the white nose disease.
Yes.
Yeah, I have no problem with them wiping that long-eared bat out. at
Okay.
all. As long as. and
That's
I
an
hope-
important. I
hope-
appreciate the clarification.
I
So-
hate it'll wipe the snails out as well.
Hey,
Some of
I
these
hear
other-
you. I know. I'm not. I'm just saying. Your chairman here is saying, "Well, I don't know who these Republicans are who want this fungus to wipe out all bats of this
that's
particular
not what
variety." You're looking at your colleague here is the one who said it. So,
I said I
go ahead.
reject the notion that the science is making this decision, because the problem with
You
the
said you
northern
reject the
long-eared
notion
bat
the Republicans don't want to
is the
protect
white
that
nose
bat.
syndrome, which the Fish and Wildlife Service has acknowledged that, yet they're not proposing any solutions to correct the white nose syndrome. And when you attack the habitat of the species you're supposedly trying to protect, you're not only hurting that species, you're hurting other species. And in my district, I've got the Ouachita National Forest, where they do a great job of protecting habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker, and they do that by management. You know what? The workers on the Forest Service there told me, they said if this bat gets listed, all of our efforts will be focused on counting bats, and we won't be able to work on the habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker, which happens to be the same kind of habitat that the northern long-eared bat likes. So if the Fish and Wildlife goal was to really help the bat, they would be going out and saying, we've got to manage to create habitat where the bat can thrive, not stop all activity and put an abnormal, unscientific cause burden on people who are working in the field. And that's what this rule will result in, and it
Mr.
will
Chairman,
hurt the bat and hurt the
I hear
economy.
you, and I've I want to give you ample, again, in recognition of you as the chair, ample opportunity to be able to make your case. And I understand that you have an opposition, ideological opposition, or you would say on the merits with respect to the rule that was promulgated by the Fish and Wildlife Service. All I'm suggesting is that in 67 days, if House Republicans shut down the government, which they seem determined to do, the American public is rightfully going to ask why they spent such valuable floor time on the long-eared bat and the lower prairie chicken and every other CRA, ESA that you all have pursued in the last 8 months. And I think that they would be reasonable to ask the question as to why the House Republicans are pursuing the priorities they are. But again, I recognize we have a difference of opinion on this. I have to give my ranking member an opportunity to jump in here and welcome his thoughts on this front.
Actually, the resolution 24 on the bat, it eliminates efforts to address white nose syndrome, the fungus that is wiping out and has caused it to be listed as threatened and needing the remediation that the law provides. And the protections that are necessary now is while wildlife scientists work to address the underlying causes of this syndrome and the devastation it's causing to the bat. That is what ESA does. Let me talk a little bit about collaboration, if I may. In my home county, back home in Arizona, Pima County, the pygmy owl was identified as a threatened and endangered species about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The reaction of the community was to set up a collaborative effort with Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, local communities, and begin a joint examination of what to do. What resulted in that was new urban planning, managing the growth of the area, protecting ranch and agricultural areas, and in the process, the economy of that region did not suffer. Transportation projects continued. And what happened is that we had a conservation plan and a biodiversity habitat protection plan. And the pygmy owl revitalized. It's back to being threatened again. But all the efforts that went into that have been part of restoring what was a species that was on not only the decline, but at the point of disappearance. Those private collaborative efforts are threatened by these resolutions. It takes the public content and the ability to participate and to have joint agreements and to supplement and provide incentives to communities to do exactly what needs to be done around that. And there is, in my mind, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, the continued use of cherry-picked information, anecdotal information, as the basis for these CRAs, I think is a most offensive thing to anybody that would like to see this debate occur based on empirical information and science. I go back to that because that's the basis of ESA and the antithesis of what we see with these two CRAs.
Yeah, and I agree with the ranking member, and my friend Mr. Rosendale was whispering to me to make sure it caught not lesser, lower prairie chicken. I do think the collaboration point is an important one. I think that's a salient point, and that certainly is the case in Colorado. Our governor has submitted a letter, which I'll enter into the record later today, talking about the collaboration efforts and why, in his view, this joint resolution misses the mark. My understanding, at least with respect to, again, the CRA regarding the lesser prairie chicken, is that there are a variety of activities. I see Mr. Rosendale smiling. A number of activities that ultimately are permitted under the rule. I mean, Mr. Chairman, maybe you can clarify this for me. My understanding was under Rule 4D, grazing is allowed. Is that Am I incorrect in that assumption?
Under Rule 4D, I believe you are correct.
Correct. And I also understand cultivated crops is permissible under Rule 4D.
But once the chicken or the bat is listed, what you will see where there's been voluntary conservation efforts on private land, those dollars will be pulled back and that management won't take place.
I understand that's your view.
And then
I
it's
think that's-
going to, on public lands, like I said, in the forest where I live, the efforts of the employees are going to be focused on managing a bat that they've never seen, but they know that it's migrated through the area.
And I recognize that's your view of what you think may happen. I guess I would just simply restate for the record, the rule enables a wide variety of activities that Fish and Wildlife Service believes can happen and ultimately simultaneously happen or occur, development, any number of other areas. And so, again, I'm not going to belabor the point. I did not want to get into an extended debate about the lesser prairie chicken or the long-eared bat, and would far prefer that we debate a variety of issues that I think the American people care deeply about: lowering costs, growing the middle class, building safer communities. So I will, hope springs eternal that perhaps at the next Rules Committee meeting that we have in 45 days after the recess, that we might be able to take up some issues that I think the American people will be very interested in hearing us take up. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.